Welcome to the Michael Zehr Show. Today's date is February 3rd, 2023, and I'm coming to you live, not dead. Yes, I'm actually alive at the Eagle Rising Studios here at the Warrior Healing Center in Sierra Vista, Arizona. And today, my special guest veteran is Andy Van Veen. Andy, sir, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy you were able to take the time out and sit down and share with us your story with us today. So, again, thank you for that.
You bet.
What I like to usually do is when I start off the show, I always like to ask where our veterans are from, where their hometown is, what home life was like, and then we'll get into joining the military. So where was home?
I grew up in Midland, Texas, West Texas.
Midland, Texas, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was
Oil
it like
country.
there? Oil country.
Oil country. Yeah. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, we experienced both the boom and the dry spell that
Okay.
the oil industry suffered for a while.
Did you go to high school and everything?
I did.
The whole-
I graduated from Midland High School,
Okay.
which is where George W. Bush's wife, she was there, but many years before me.
Oh, okay.
I think she graduated, I want to say it was in the late 50s from Midland High School, and I graduated in
Wow.
1984. So.
Whenever I hear of Midland, I always think of the Midland CB radios.
Oh, you're
for
right.
some reason.
Right. Yeah.
So when you're in high school and you were kind of thinking about what your future held, what were you thinking? What were your goals at that time, or did you have any?
Well, it's interesting. I was heavily involved in the Future Farmers of America all through high school, which I know my wife right now is saying nerd, but I really enjoyed it. I thought I was going to go into something in livestock industry, but starting about my junior year, the military really started appealing to me. And finally, by my senior year in high school, I actually went down and joined midway through my senior year of high school. So I joined the Army in December of 1983 and just was in the delayed entry program till
Okay.
graduation.
When you were in FFA, what were you doing? Were you like into the livestock aspect of it?
Yeah, I actually I raced pigs for show.
Okay.
Went to a lot of livestock shows all over Texas, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I found it to be a way to keep busy because I worked after school and then come home, take care of the pigs and get them ready and
Right.
do all that, and so that regimented schedule that I kept, I think helped kind of steer me more toward the military because you got all of these things you have to do every day.
Yeah,
so.
good discipline.
Yeah, and it was actually a Future Farmers of America National Convention that I went to my senior year in November.
Where
in
at?
Missouri.
In Missouri?
Yeah, we
Okay.
went to, I believe it was Springfield, Missouri, and they had a huge expo there. And of course, one of the booths was the Army. And that's where I sat down with recruiters for the first time and started getting the sales pitch. So.
Did you have any family history in the military service?
No, my yes, on my mom's side, my grandfather served in World War II in the Navy.
Okay.
Yeah, and he drove a landing craft for the Marines, and
wow.
then he saw quite a bit of action in the Pacific. And then on my dad's side, though, my dad is actually from Holland, so I'm the first generation. So his father and mother, my grandparents, after World War II was over, signed up to come to America. And it took 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, they signed up in 46 and they immigrated here in 56. So, yeah, quite a long time. But yeah, so I'm first generation on my dad's side here to be born in America.
Good morning, Keith. Thanks for joining us. If any of you that are watching now or watch later have any questions, just type them in the comment section. And if it's during the live stream, I'll pop it up on screen here. We'll be happy to answer those questions for you. And if it's afterwards, we always like to try and follow the streams and comments. And you can also pop your comments or questions in there, and we will get those answered as well. Just give us time if it's after the live show is done, because it takes a while to go through all the shows. So we pretty much then know how you were inspired to join the military. You said you were at the 4-H or the FFA fair in Missouri, the booth there. Did Oh, I forgot to ask. How many blue ribbons did you win with your pigs?
Actually, just one blue ribbon.
One blue ribbon?
Yeah. I had a couple runner-ups
Uh-huh.
over the years, but yeah, my senior year actually was a nice crowning moment because it was my last hog that I was going to be showing, and I actually won and got a buckle and everything out of it. Yeah. So. Yeah.
How do they judge them in the competition? Is it by weight or
you know,
what?
There's a whole I couldn't tell you exactly because it's been so long, but there's a whole set of criteria, and they have, I think it's a panel of like 3 judges, and you have to take the hog out into a showing area, and you run them around for like 5 minutes, and they look at all kinds of different aspects of the way the hog is, bone structure and all that, and how well the person showing him the techniques they use to actually present the pig to the judges. So if you work really hard and you develop a technique where you keep the pig in front of the judges, back and forth or whatever, they can get a better look, and you actually get some points for that, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but.
How big was your biggest hog that you had?
Oh gosh.
Weight-wise?
Gosh, probably close to 300 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. You don't want them to be too big, and there's age. I forget and the criteria's probably changed since then. This was in the early 80s, but.
And it's still going strong today.
Oh, Future Farmers of America, it's a great program. I've highly recommend. My kids weren't, unfortunately, they were not interested in it. But now that I have grandkids, I try to steer them into
Fingers
it.
crossed. Right?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that works.
Oh, so when did you actually go into active duty? What was your active duty date?
So I graduated from high school. I think it was May 28th. 5 days later, I was on the plane going to basic training.
And where was that?
I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
So I got there on the 5th of June.
Had you ever been to South Carolina before?
No, I'd never.
No? What was your experience when you got there, your first experience?
Well, a lot of yelling. So I didn't see South Carolina much, obviously. Got right off the bus and, brought into reception station there, and, you spend a few days there. And then
drill sergeants
pick you up. And, yeah. So.
And you were at Fort Jackson for how long?
For the 2 months for basic training.
For basic training?
Yeah.
And then where did you go for your advanced individualized training?
Well, I enlisted to be a 05 Charlie is what it was back in the 80s, a single channel radio operator, or better known as a radio teletype operator back in the days. And I had the airborne option. So I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and that was at that time it was a self-paced course. So they had modules, and as soon as the faster you could complete a module, you moved on to the next one. And so I'd already knew how to type, so I had taken that in high school, and that's usually what took people a long time. It would take guys like 4 or 5 weeks just to pass the typing test. And I did it on day 1 and got out of there, so I moved on to the next module. So a buddy of mine who also knew how to type, he and I both finished, I think we were done by October. We got there in August, we were done by October, and we just had to wait for an airborne school date, and that came up the 1st of November. So he and I went to jump school, and then we reported to Fort Bragg together.
I don't know, this is why I'm asking, I'm just curious. Why would a teletype or single channel radio operator need or want jump school, or is that open to all MOSs?
Well, yeah. So as anybody who's been in knows, and for those of you who don't, the Army has always, since World War II, maintained a large contingent of airborne qualified units. So every job that the Army had, they had those jobs, those MOSs, in airborne units. So a certain percentage of everybody who enlisted, the Army needed them to be airborne qualified so they could send them to the airborne units. And so when I went to enlist, I specifically wanted to be in an airborne unit. So I waited. It didn't take long, but I needed to wait a few weeks for every month they would release the allocations of how many jobs in those fields would be airborne. And so then I waited and I got one so that I could be a paratrooper.
What was training like for that?
It was a lot of fun. It was long days, and they run hundreds of people through at the same time. And so your class is just enormous. I mean, we had probably 300 people in my jump school class. And
Wow.
yeah, it's like herding cattle. And so they just take you through, and you go through ground week and then tower week and then the actual jump week. And it goes by really fast. So
I have to ask, what was your first jump like?
what
was the feeling like?
the first jump, it's more the second jump that is the issue.
Really?
Your first jump, you don't have a lot of time to think about it, okay? And it's a static line, and unless you're the first guy in line, and I only did that once in my whole career was I ever first in the door. That guy has a little while to think about it because he has to stand there in the doorway waiting for the jump master to tell him to go. But when you're in the middle of what they call a stick, which is just the squad of guys lined up in the aircraft, you're cabled to with your static line to the cable, and as soon as they start going, you're just shuffling and you just follow everybody out the door. So that first one, it all just happens really quick, and there's a lot of loud noise from the wind, and then all of a sudden you're floating. That second jump is when you have time. You're sitting in the aircraft to think about what happened the first time, and if you're gonna have second thoughts, that's where. And I don't remember anybody on my aircraft quitting, but there were times where people came back that said, "Nope, this isn't for me," and they made it clear to you before you went out on your jumps, your qualification jumps, that if you refuse to go, you're done. You're out of the program. There's no changing your mind and getting a second chance. If you don't make the jump and you go back with the aircraft and land, you're out.
I cannot imagine what the feeling must be like to jump out of a perfectly good working airplane.
Yeah.
And then you're just free falling. Well, I don't know. You don't free fall that long, do you?
No,
and the chute opens right away.
Well, it's on that static line. And what's funny is when you go out the door, you immediately go sideways because the jet, whether it's the prop or the jet blast, and just the aircraft going, 100 miles an hour through the air, you go sideways, and then as the chute comes out, and it opens, then you'll swing back down like the pendulum of a clock, and so you'll be completely sideways, and then you'll come back down. So it's very loud from the wind when that first happens, but then when it opens, then it's almost completely quiet.
How high are you when you jump? What's your altitude?
Well, there's different altitudes that they jump from. So I think the lowest we did, and that they would call them like combat jumps, was like 800 feet, and that's where you have.
Wow, that's not high at all, is it?
No, not very high. I don't even know why they gave us a reserve at that. But that's where you have everything. You got your rifle in the padded case. You got your rucksack. You got everything. But then we would also do what were called Hollywood jumps, where you just put the parachutes on and that's it. And a lot of times those were from like 1,200 feet or 1,500 feet.
Yeah. I'm just picturing what it must be like to be floating down to earth and seeing the ground coming at you at a fairly high rate of speed, right?
Yeah, sometimes, the best times are on a summer day when it's pretty warm and you don't have a lot of wind, because then all that upflow from the heat, slows your descent.
Really?
A cold, windy day is the worst time to jump because you fall faster, and then if the wind's blowing you, and you're not supposed to jump over, I forget what the wind speeds are, where the Army's supposed to say, "Oh, we're not going to jump because the winds are too hard." But when you're coming down fast in the wintertime and the wind's blowing, you're trying to tilt the parachute into the wind to slow you down, but still, it's just like you hit like a sack of potatoes. You hit the ground so hard sometimes. And then, of course, the ground is cold, so that makes it even worse. So,
how many jumps did you do during your career?
It was like 26, I believe it was, altogether.
How many injuries?
A lot.
A lot?
I could have swore I broke a toe on one of my qualification jumps, but again, you don't say anything because if you go to medical, then you get recycled and you got to go back through. So one of my jumps, I hit and I had a really sharp pain in my toe, and I had my buddy look at it, and he's just like, "Hey, let's just tape them together," and
No sick call.
No, I was like, "Nope, I'm not doing this again." So like, I'm going through and I'm getting done. So
that's one thing I would like to encourage any of our younger troops to do that are just newly enlisting or thinking of enlisting. Get this stuff documented, because a lot of times as a service officer, when veterans like yourself come in that have had injuries in the service, they're hard to prove sometimes because we didn't want to go on sick call. We didn't want to get you know.
Exactly. That is excellent advice, because I had this conversation yesterday with someone about the fact that I didn't document any of my injuries, and I spent 31 years in the Army, and but in our generation was a lot like the previous. I learned from all the Vietnam vets. That's who trained me, and it was, hey, you don't say anything, just keep your mouth shut, try to suck it up, complete the mission, drive on, and unfortunately, what happens is, and I feel it now,
right,
in my 50s, is all of those things aren't a big deal when you're 18, 20 years old. Now, when you get 40, 50 years old, it starts to become an issue for you and your quality of life and all of that. So if you don't document it, like you're saying,
right,
makes it very difficult to.
The good thing is, though, is that with the DD Form 214s, being able to prove that you were on jump status, if you're able to show like how many jumps you had, the Army is pretty smart at knowing, this person probably got these, injuries.
Sure. Yeah.
So I would not discourage anybody that ever was injured in the military from filing a claim with the VA for VA disability, because it's something that they earned and they're entitled to it. As yourself. I don't know if you've done that or not, but if you haven't, you should.
Yeah. That's one of those. You? Well, I'm in the VA system. I just don't have. I just never applied for a rating for anything.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, if you ever want to get that done, come on down to the DAB. They'll take good care of you down there, and it's all free. Or you can go to any of the other service organizations here in Cochise County that represent our veterans free of charge. Sure. So I just wanted to say that, because I think that's really important that our veterans not wait.
Oh yeah.
I've had so many, mostly men, come in and say the only reason I'm here 20 years later is because my wife has been pushing and pushing and pushing. So spouses, keep up the good work. Keep pushing.
I hear a lot of good things about the DAV. So it's important.
So getting back to you and your service now. Hello, Kathy. Thank you.
You bet.
I appreciate that. Getting back to your service, so you completed jump school at Fort Gordon.
No, that's at Fort Benning.
Or Fort Benning.
That's also in Georgia.
Fort Benning, Georgia. I'm sorry, I said Fort Gordon. My bad.
Well, I did the radio teletype course at
Fort Gordon, and then went to Benning for
jump school. Yeah.
So after jump school, what was your very first duty assignment?
So I got assigned to Fort Bragg, and when I got there, my buddy got sent to the 82nd Airborne Division, and I got sent to 18th Airborne Corps, and assigned to they had just reorganized it like the year before, the 319th Military Intelligence Battalion, which was under the 525 MI Brigade. And from my understanding, in '82 they were reactivated in the active Army, put on jump status, and assigned to Fort Bragg. And so they were still filling out the battalions when I got assigned there. So a whole bunch of us got there about the same time.
What's the difference between a corps being assigned to like a corps and a division? Is it just a different?
Yeah, it's just the different echelons, and of course this isn't even the way that the Army is structured. And now you got they've changed the way it used to be corps and division and brigade, and now you got the combat brigades, and the chain of command is very similar to what it used to be.
Okay.
They just call them, the whole Army's force structure is they've renamed it. So you still have brigades and you still have divisions, but the way that the formations are put together are modular now, so that they can pick and choose units from across, instead of back in the day where the 82nd Airborne Division, they just had a whole bunch of different battalions under them so that they could sustain themselves. They had supply and communications and all the different things. So now things are a lot more modular. They can be moved around. But some units, like the 82nd, they have a bunch of units under them that report directly to them and work technically for them.
Okay.
And then there were other units like the 525 MI Brigade that I got assigned to, reported directly to 18th Airborne Corps. They were a corps level asset. So for different types of missions and stuff. So we had an entire platoon in my intelligence battalion, and we were all communications people to provide communication support to the intel people.
So after when you first arrived at your first duty station, what was your rank at that time?
It was a private first class.
PFC. Had you met your wife yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not
Okay.
yet. Not on that duty station.
So after your first duty assignment, It seemed like you were really kind of stuck on the East Coast there for a while, right?
I was, yeah.
For the first couple of years.
And honestly, a lot of people told me that not to expect, because I signed up for 4 years, and I was told by a lot of people, hey, if you're going airborne and you go to Fort Bragg, you're going to spend your whole enlistment there. You're not going to go anywhere else because,
Okay.
the way the Army is, they're trying to, those were the Reagan years, and they were trying to completely rebuild the Army from the 70s. And they were, shifting gears, a lot of money being spent on modernization. And so they said, you'll probably be there your whole 4 years. But no, I got lucky, and halfway through, I got orders to go to Germany.
So Germany, where was your first sturdy station in Germany at? Where did you get assigned to?
I got assigned to bomb holder.
Bomb holder?
And if anybody's been to Germany, they know where bomb holder is, and it's called the Rock. And there's a lot of people, we joke, there's two places you didn't want to go to in Germany back then, and that was Grafenwehr or the Rock, bomb holder. And Grafenwehr was a big training area down by Vilseck, and so I got assigned to bomb holder. So right away, when I got the orders, everybody's like, oh, you're going to bomb holder, you're going to hate it. I actually loved it there. I got assigned to do communications for a combat engineer unit.
So when you arrived and stepped off the airplane, because here you are from West Texas, born and raised, then you mostly served on the East Coast. Now you're in a whole different country, speaks a whole different language, a whole different look, feel, everything.
Oh yeah, and back then it was West Germany. A lot of younger people don't realize back in the 80s, it was West Germany. We were considered the good guys, and then East Germany, controlled by Russia. So, West Germany, and you get out, and it's a whole different culture, and colder than I'd ever been in my life. That's probably why I live here in Sierra Vista now, because I don't really want to be in snow up to my knees. So
I'm guessing you got to see the wall then, huh?
No, actually.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
You never went there to look?
Well, I wanted to, but when you had I had a top secret clearance from working with the military intelligence unit, and there were all of these procedures you had to go through if you wanted to go and visit. It was highly controlled, and you had to fill out all this paperwork, and so honestly, I just
avoided it.
I did. I was there for a year and a half, almost 2 years, and I just never. That was one of the things that I never got around to doing. I traveled a lot of other places, but yeah.
What was your most memorable time there in Baumholder?
Well, I have to say this because my wife's watching, so that's where I met her. So that would
so you met in Germany. Okay.
That would be the best moment or experience of my time in Germany.
Good answer.
I gotta say that.
Right, you covered that great. So
yeah,
you don't have to worry about walking home today.
Exactly. Yeah, she's not gonna leave me in the parking lot. So yeah, I had a lot of fun in Germany. Like I said, I don't like being cold though. So that going out to the field in the snow, I was not a fan of that. Although it got pretty cold in North Carolina too, but that was. But it was good training, and I, having spent 31 years in the Army, seeing it from the early '80s to when I retired in 2015. I liked the '80s Army. I really did. There were a lot of qualities and things about the way the Army operated during that decade that I felt were very efficient, very sound in the way our units were fielded and our equipment. And it's obviously completely different now, and I know change is inevitable. But I enjoyed the way that our, especially in my MOS, our op tempo worked, and the way the work that I did, I really enjoyed.
For those of you that don't know, Andy's wife is Evie. She's the volunteer coordinator or lead volunteer. I'm not exactly sure but she's the boss
the
of all of
volunteer
us
coordinator.
Yeah. And I offered for her to sit down here with us, but she said no, let Andy have his moment. So here we are. But I just wanted to let our audience know that. So
she was a supply clerk in the combat engineer unit.
I was going to ask how you guys met.
Yeah. And what's funny, and you talk about what a small world it really is. When I got assigned to bomb holder, I had already been in the Army for over 2 years, and I remember before I went to Germany, I went home on leave back in Texas, and I went to a party, and I ran into a bunch of my friends from high school, and one of them had been going to college. He was going to Texas Tech, and so he's asking me all about the Army because he was doing ROTC. He was very interested in getting into the Army after college, and so we had a conversation that night, and then here we are like 5 months later, and I'm going to our motor pool at the base in Baumholder. And I see these two guys walking with duffel bags, new guys who just got, you could tell they're doing the duffel bag drag going from the bus stop over to the reception center. And I told the guy that was driving the truck, I said, hey, slow down a second. This guy looks familiar. And I rolled the window down, and it's this friend of mine from high school, Devin, who I had that conversation with 4 months earlier. And he had dropped out of college, joined the Army.
Wow.
And got assigned to Baumholder. He was an infantryman, and that was the 8th Infantry Division was assigned to Baumholder back then. And he got assigned there. So he was when you get there, you do 2 weeks of the reception training, and they teach you the basic German and driving the road signs and all that. And he got there the same time Evie got there. And Evie was going through that training the same time he was.
Uh-huh.
And Evie had a friend that she had made there, another I forget if she was our supply or a cook. Anyway, Evie and her were together, kind of like battle buddies. And Devin meets them, and he's striking up a conversation with Evie's friend and arranges a date and says, hey, we'll bring Evie, and I'll have my buddy that I went to high school with come, and he and Evie can get together. So that's how I end up meeting Evie, is on this blind date from my friend from high school set me up on.
Isn't that weird how things...
I'm telling you, it's a small world. Yeah. And then as I'm talking to her, I find out she's assigned to my unit at the headquarters company. It just kind of went from there. And we were actually, we dated a little bit, and then we kind of had other interests. I was trying to get my degree and stuff, so then we were just friends for like a year. And then it just, we started dating again, and it went from there.
Had you left Baumgartner by then?
No, we dated the whole rest of the time we were there, and she came back to the States a few months before I did. She just did a 2-year enlistment. Back then, you could do 2 years active duty and 6 years in the reserves.
In active reserve, okay.
And so that's how she did it, the 2 and 6 split. And so her enlistment was up, and she came back. And so then we had to write letters back and forth. For all you youngsters, there was no internet.
Yeah.
And phone calls were
no email.
Very expensive. Yeah, no email, and phone calls were super expensive. We wrote letters back and forth. So I'd write a letter, send it, and she'd get it 5-6 days later, write a letter, send it back. But then a few months later, I came back to the States, and then we got back together, and we ended up getting married on the way to the next duty station.
And where was the next duty station?
Well, I ended up doing some temporary duty in Florida.
Where at?
At the Navy.
A Navy base.
Pensacola. But I was going to change job careers because I was coming to the end of my 4-year enlistment at that time.
Okay.
And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was going to stay in. I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And so I thought about flying, Fort Rucker, all that. And the Navy had a program where they were taking service members from all branches because they were trying to increase their pilot population. And I had a best friend of mine who did that jump from the one that I went to Fort Bragg with, who went to the 82nd. He jumped over to the Navy to be a pilot. So we went down there, and I was there about a month, and I just decided, that wasn't going to work out. And so Evie and I had a long talk. She wanted me to get off active duty. And so I was at a crossroads. So I said, well, how about if I transition to the reserves and I get a civilian job somewhere? She said, yeah, that would probably be better for us and doing a family and all that. So I said, well, what am I going to do? And she said, well, join the Highway Patrol. And she's from California.
Join the what?
Join the Highway Patrol.
Okay.
That was her. When I said, well, what am I going to do in civilian world? She said, join the Highway Patrol. And she's from California, so obviously she wanted me to join the California Highway Patrol. And I said, well, I'm from Texas, so I want to join. So the way that we settled that was I said, I'll apply to both. And whoever hires me first is where we'll move to and start our family. And California won. And they were hiring, they were doing a 500 officer expansion.
Wow.
which is a lot. Well, right now they're actually doing 1,000. The California Highway Patrol, as we
At this
speak,
moment.
is
Wow.
actively trying to hire 1,000 new officers. So if anybody out there is interested in doing that as a career, they're trying to hire a lot of people. And when they do that, the hiring process goes a lot quicker. And so when they were doing the 500 officer expansion, then I started the process. I want to say it was in June of '88, and I was in the academy in December of '88. And they wanted me to go in September, but I was on active duty still.
Okay.
And I couldn't. They wouldn't release me in time. So I actually, that was kind of when Evie and I made that decision. I told the Army, I said, okay, I'm gonna just go into the reserves, and I picked a drill sergeant unit. Actually, back then they had entire divisions in the Army Reserve of drill sergeants because we had a large Army. They wanted to have plenty of reserve assets if they had to make the Army big again in World War III.
Right.
So I chose a drill sergeant unit. So my last 2 months of active duty, I went to drill sergeant school at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
What was your rank?
I was a sergeant, E5. I just
Okay.
made sergeant, and I volunteered, which back then, I don't think another drill sergeant in my class was, maybe one other guy was a volunteer. The rest were all DA selected, forced to be there. They would give them a choice. You're either going to be a drill sergeant or a recruiter, which one you want.
So you made E5 within 4 years?
Yeah, I actually made E5 in 2 years. I
Wow.
made E5 when I was in Germany still as a communications sergeant.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's because I was telling you, I was going to college.
Right.
And there was a brief window back then. They had cutoff scores. I'm not sure if they still do or not because I went on to become a warrant officer. But they had cutoff scores, and so every once in a while, and they would stay really high. In my career field, they were really high, and then all of a sudden,
They
dropped. And because I'd been going to college and everything, I had just enough points. I think I barely made it by like 20 points, and all of a sudden, orders showed up, and I got promoted to sergeant, and no one was really expecting it, even myself. But yeah, so I made that, and it was like right around the 2-year mark.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you got out, then you go to California, and where at in California? Where's the Highway Patrol
Well,
Academy?
my wife's from Redding,
Okay.
which is up north. It's up north of Sacramento, about a couple hours north. And Sacramento is the actual capital of California, where the headquarters for the Highway Patrol is. And the academy's there as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and the academy is there as well. And so, like I said, I was doing a bunch of active duty. I was back at Fort Benning, actually teaching basic training, when the Highway Patrol said, "Hey, we want you to be in the September class." And I tried, but I was right in the middle of a cycle, so I couldn't just leave. So, yeah, so I got picked up in December of '88. I started with the Highway Patrol.
And I do find that military service members make the best law enforcement officers because they already know how to follow orders. They know.
I would say, yeah, it can be a blessing and a curse.
How would it be a curse?
In some ways, it's a curse because, and anybody who's made that transition from military to civilian life knows that, especially back then, the military was very, very, very structured, and levels of discipline were a lot higher than what they are today.
Right.
And to take that mentality into civilian law enforcement, it can serve you well as far as your instincts and how you perform your duties. However, in your interpersonal relations with the public, you have to really massage that down so you're not coming across quite so deliberate, you know what I mean, and harsh.
Right.
There's a nuance to it that you have, and so it took me a little while to learn that, to
Wow.
overcome that. You can't just be, because I'll be honest with you, when I was growing up, I had some contacts with law enforcement. I had a lot of tickets, speeding tickets. I had a little bit of a lead foot, which I had to do a lot of tap dancing at my interview at the Highway Patrol to explain why I had a lengthy traffic violation record. And I think I sold it when I said, "Hey, I know what it's like to receive a ticket, so I'll know if I'm giving one, it's well-deserved." And I thought that was funny. I don't know if my interviewers did, but it went over well, and I got hired. But it took me a little while, and I was very headstrong in the beginning, and obviously from the military, the gung-ho spirit and all that.
Right.
And so it took me a little while to mellow that out. And then once I did, then yes, all that military experience was a huge benefit. But I also saw friends of mine who were prior military that it caused them quite a lot of problems. I didn't really care for cops when I was growing up. I had a lot of, I thought they were over authoritative and pompous and so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't that way as I did that job, because I was very conscious of how I was treated when I was growing up. And when I would see other military guys who became officers act that way, and I went on to be a training officer, so because I felt that strongly about a lot of this stuff, so I could take these guys aside and say, look, you can't treat the public that way. It just doesn't. It's not well for the job. It's not well for your career, and so.
So then, how long was the academy, and then what was your first assignment out of the academy?
So it was almost just under 6 months long, and back then we had to be EMTs as well. So you went through all your law enforcement training, and then the last month was you became an emergency medical technician. And I forget when the higher patrol stopped doing that, but it was important then. It was a new part of the program that they brought on in the late 80s, that every officer graduating would be an EMT and carry the full medical bag so that you could provide those services at an accident scene if you needed to.
Yeah, life-saving.
Yeah. So I finished the academy, and I got assigned to Riverside, which is just east of the Los Angeles metropolitan area.
I know Riverside.
Yeah, you've been there?
I've been there a few times.
Okay.
I've been through it, going to Disneyland with my grandkids.
Okay,
and
yeah.
Stuff, and
Yeah. So I worked there for the whole first half of my career. I was there from the spring of '89 until the spring of 2002.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it. I was for the last 5 of those years there, I was a motorcycle officer because I grew up watching Ponch and John and Chips.
Yeah, okay.
And so finally in 1997, there was a long waiting line to get on a motorcycle then. I mean, it was very popular and the waiting list was of officers. It went by seniority. So if you were a junior guy, if you were new, you waited several years before you could actually get the opportunity to go to the motorcycle school and get qualified. But
well, that's a really nice comment there. Warrior Healing. That is refreshing to hear. Thank you for being a good role model for law enforcement.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of officers that share the same mindset that I have out there working, and that's why we always stress. Look, that you get that 1%, that probably shouldn't be wearing the badge, and they tarnish it for everybody, for the other 99%. And so I think, and I don't want to go off the rails too far,
right.
But after spending almost 30 years wearing the badge, and I look at what's happening now, it's not. Officers get a lot of training. What we have to focus on is who's being selected, and the criteria that we use to select officers. And unfortunately, in the last 10 years, agencies are reducing the requirements instead of holding a higher standard, because when you have a very high standard, it is hard to get the proper number of people. That's why the Higher Patrol is trying to hire 1,000 people right now, because they cannot get enough qualified candidates to enter the program.
And then you got the defund the police movement and stuff that they're trying to combat.
Yep.
And I get that there's bad police officers, but I would say 99.9% of law enforcement is good personnel, and it only takes 1% to make.
Yeah.
And that's for any job. That's not just for law enforcement.
Yeah.
That's any position or job can be that way.
Yeah. I mean, I got my degree in criminal justice too during my career, and I don't have the conversation with a lot of people because a lot of people don't want to have a serious conversation about the problems. But my brief answer to that is, look, we have to look at the cycle. If the public wants better quality law enforcement officers, and why wouldn't they, right?
Right.
Okay. The answer to that is have good standardized selection processes, training processes, and then ongoing, during your career, keeping them at that standard, right? But if you lower the standards
right there
artificially, you're going to get people who shouldn't be an officer. And then what's going to happen? The rate of negative incidents with officers is going to go up. So when the public is misled by being told, hey, we gotta do this, we have to have all these different criteria, the big thing you always hear is diversity. Okay, I get it. Diversity is a great concept, but if you say, okay, you got to score here on a certain test for a white male, and you have to score at this level for a female, and then at this, and you go on down, and that's what they do nowadays, is they go through all these different levels depending on where, they we're supposed to all be one,
Right.
but yet they break us apart into these different categories, and they recruit based on, well, we need a percentage of this category, a percentage of this category, and then you change okay, it's too hard for them to pass, for everybody to pass this particular type course, so we'll change the criteria.
Right.
So you can go on and on and on, but anybody will tell you, you do that and the public's not getting what they're asking for. They're getting more of what they don't want. You're going to get more officers out there causing problems. So unfortunately, we're in this cycle right now, and my nephew just became an officer about 8 years ago, and I told him.
Where at?
Yeah, up in Redding, in
Redding?
California,
Okay.
yeah, where my wife's from, where we moved to from here, or moved from there to here. But yeah, so it's gonna take quite a few years before this cycle is corrected. If you get people back on track with, a standardized system of quality, and not just stop going by these different categories. Have a high standard for what an officer should do, and then whoever meets that, let them be an officer. You know what I mean? And I worked with a lot of different background people, male, female, all the different orientation, whatever. That's not, who you are isn't what makes you a good officer. It's, your philosophy about the job, your training, your, and how you perform your duties. That's what makes a good officer. And that's what we should focus on, not where you come from or who you are.
And I know this has, just because we're talking about law enforcement real quick, I doubt he'll see it, but I just want to give a shout out to Cochise County Sheriff Daniels that testified in front of Congress the other day about what it's like for our law enforcement and the immigration issues that we're having here in Cochise County with the load car drivers and the fentanyl and everything, and he did an outstanding job, and for that I just wanted to say thank you, Sheriff.
Yeah, that was
for
I watched.
doing that.
Yeah, I watched part of that, and that was a very good presentation. And that when you take a good comprehensive presentation and you give facts and you give specific things that you can point to, it's hard to refute that.
Right.
But unfortunately, no matter how much factual information is
When
presented,
politics gets
when
involved,
politics is involved,
then it's
that tends to overshadow the effectiveness of good hard facts.
yeah. So getting back to you're in Redding, did you say?
So we moved to Redding, and then when I
Okay.
graduated the academy, we went to Riverside.
Riverside, that's
And
right.
yeah, so that was 1989, and it became very apparent to me that trying to be a new officer on the Higher Patrol and be successful, going to court all the time, patrol work, shift work, working graveyards, different shifts. The Army, trying to keep up with my 1 week in a month and 2 weeks in the summer, I thought I need to take a break. So the Army, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it, but in the reserves you have an active reserve component where you go the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer. That's how it used to be. And then they have the IRR, which is the inactive ready reserve.
Right.
And that's where you can go there, and you're still in the Army, but you don't have to go in. You don't have to report to a unit. They just hold you in an inactive status on the rolls. And I did that for 6 years. I just
So
kind
that
of took
something
a break.
pops up, then boom.
Yeah, they can immediately take you back out, pop you back into a unit, and off you go. And in fact, so I did that for 6 years. I took a break, and we had 2 kids, and I got myself established in the career with the Higher Patrol, and then I thought, okay, it's time. I can start doing this again.
Want to give a shout out to your kids real quick?
I do. It's my
And
son.
grandkids?
My son Trevor and my daughter Brittany, and my son did 4 years in the Marine Corps, so
Semper Fi?
Semper Fi to him, and he's happy to be out. Used his GI Bill, so he's married and have our first two grandchildren. I have a granddaughter 3 and a grandson that's 1.5.
Uh-huh.
And then my daughter is still in Southern California. She went back to Southern California. She lives in Corona. And my daughter Brittany is about to have, her and her husband Johnny are going to have our third grandchild in the end of April.
Which will be their first?
Their first.
Wow,
yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah, and she's an attorney, so I'm very proud of her. Yeah, she is a family law attorney in Southern California.
And where does Trevor live?
Trevor and his wife Kelsey live in Fort Collins. Well, now they live in Johnstown. They just actually got a new house in Johnstown, which is south of Fort Collins, north of Denver.
Okay.
Yeah.
They like Colorado, I'm guessing?
They like the cold.
Yeah?
Yeah, so...
No thanks. My parents moved us out here from Illinois, man, and don't miss all that big, thick, heavy snow. But
I love Colorado. It's absolutely beautiful, but I don't like snow, so we don't go there in the wintertime.
So how did you end up going back in the military? What was the circumstances behind that?
I just, I missed it. I really did. And
after how many years?
6. So from 1990, I told the Army, so I'm just going to go inactive. It's just too busy. And I really thought I was going to get called back for Desert Storm because a lot of my friends who were in the IRR got called back for Desert Storm. Pulled them right out of the IRR and sent them, attached them to a unit and sent them, activated them. And I kept thinking, is this the day I'm going to get the letter in the mail? But I didn't. And so I spent 90 to 96 in the IRR. And then in 96, I went back and said, hey, I want to get back into a unit. And my last assignment had been as a drill sergeant, so I wanted to do that again. And
really? Okay.
So I went back, but the unit that I was in, the 91st Training Division, had changed. The Army had changed them from teaching basic training to conducting training for different units, kind of like what they do at Fort Ord when you go to NTC, the National Training Center. When units go to the National Training Center in California, they get met by a unit that does nothing but program training for them and then conduct it and evaluate it as realistic as they can. The reserves decided they would do the same model, and they created this unit. So I became what was called an observer controller as a non-commissioned officer. So I was on a team, and my team was responsible for military, police, and communications units. And we would devise training plans and training exercises for those units in the National Guard and Reserves.
When you came back onto active duty, did you have to go back through basic training again?
No, because if you stay in like I never got out. I was still in the inactive reserve. Okay. So yeah, you're just kind of like sitting there.
All right.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if there was an amount of time, like how it, after so many years, so when you went back in, what was your rank?
E5.
You went back in sergeant. You maintained your rank. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you stay current, you don't lose anything in the IR. But if you let your back then, when you had enlistment contracts, if you got out, if you let your contract expire, then you would have to start over.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was able to just slide right back in and start training again, which I enjoyed. I liked that.
And then what was your first duty assignment from there?
So originally, the unit I was in Southern California, and our headquarters was in Norco, California, which is right by where I lived. I lived in Corona, and then we moved out to Los Alamitos, which is in Orange County, California. They moved the unit out there, and there's a large National Guard base there, and so we were there all the way. I stayed there until I transferred in 2002 when I transferred up north with the Higher Patrol.
And did you deploy at any time anywhere?
Yeah, so while I was doing the training thing from 96 to 2002, I got promoted up to E7. So when I left, I was a sergeant first class. Yeah. And when I transferred with the Higher Patrol up to Redding, I transferred with the Army Reserve to a communications unit in Sacramento. And actually decided to because I had been doing training for so long, I wanted to actually go back and do my communications job again. So I joined a signal battalion in Sacramento, and so I got there in 2002, and then I was there for a year, and they were doing warrant officer recruiting, and this team was going around to all the Army Reserve units saying, hey, we need warrant officers, and they wanted to see all the E6s and E7s and all that, and I sat through their presentation and Went home, I told the wife, I said, man, this warrant officer thing sounds pretty good. So I put in a packet and I got selected for that. So
Awesome.
And yeah, so in 2003, I went to warrant officer candidate school down at Fort Rucker. And because I don't like to do the reserve schools, I like to go to the active duty. And because the higher patrol would always give me the time. They gave me 30 days a year, and then I could use vacation time. So I would always try, for Army schools, I would always try to go to the active duty school, because back in the 80s and 90s, the Army Reserve didn't always have the latest and greatest equipment or the most current curriculum for training. So I always wanted to go to active duty. So I did that, and I went to Fort Rucker, and yeah, that was quite an experience. My understanding is the warrant officer program now, the training course is more of a gentleman's course, I guess is what I hear people keep describing it as. It wasn't that. When I went through it in 2003, it was still pretty much 6 weeks of hazing, is a good way to put it. But it's hazing with a purpose, teaching you to handle a lot of chaos and still get all your tasks done that you need to get done.
So you were on active duty then when 9/11 happened?
No.
No, you weren't?
No, I was working for the Higher Patrol, and we got all put on. I was still down in Riverside.
Okay, I thought you said that you had went active by then.
No, that's coming up. That's coming up. So yeah, right after 9/11, so after the initial emergency was over, the first couple of weeks, the Higher Patrol, we went back to normal shifts. And then the Army had our teams going around training a lot of the Reserve and National Guard units that were going to deploy to Afghanistan. So I spent the rest of 2001 and 2002, before I went up north in California, just going on mission after mission. We'd do 2 or 3 week training missions, getting units ready to go.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is how did 9/11 affect what you were doing at the time, and going back into the military, how it kind of affected, which you've answered. So
yeah, I mean it was 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, before 9/11. After 9/11, it rapidly. I always tell people I did my initial 4 years of active duty after high school, but after 9/11, I did an additional 3 years of active duty altogether, between all my deployments and everything. So it became more and more. So first it was these 2-3 weeks at a time, go train a unit to get them ready to go. And because we would get them in California, train, and then they would go to a major base like Fort Bliss or Fort Hood, Texas, and then they would do another month with the active Army of getting certified as a unit, and then they would get sent to Afghanistan. But then I became a warrant officer, and as soon as I got back, our unit was slated to go to Iraq. Iraq had kicked off there in 2003. So by November of 2003, my unit got activated to go to Iraq.
Okay.
The Signal Battalion. So it started. We showed up in November at my reserve unit in Sacramento, and I'll never get it. The command sergeant major of our battalion. He actually lives here in Arizona now. He's up in Oracle. Sergeant Major Belanger. Kudos, you were probably the best sergeant major I ever worked with. But he had everybody get together in the reserve unit hall, our big chow hall, and he said, "Welcome to the longest reserve drill weekend of your career," and basically read off the mobilization orders to everybody, and basically, hey, you're on active duty for 545 days minimum. Well, not minimum. I'm sorry, that was the maximum. So yeah, so we got activated in November, and then and deployed. We did a bunch of training. And then right after the first of the year, we left Fort Bliss. We got to Kuwait in March of 2004, and we had to spend an entire year in theater. So we spent, not that I was counting, I spent 355 days in theater before our unit was allowed to come home. So that was my...
What was your first impression of Kuwait and Iraq when you first got there?
Well, we want to keep it PG, so I was not very impressed with the environment over there. It was, Now, as far as the Army,
but it was the like the way the country was.
Yeah, just the way it was set up, and it's completely different. It's hard to explain to people, what it's like, when you go halfway around the world. Now, I grew up in a quasi-desert environment, but I mean, this was real
desert. That's
real
what I
desert.
hear from a lot of people that have been over there. They say
Yes.
that the heat is just, and the sand. I mean,
Yeah, and when we got there in March, the sandstorms were just. I think we were there a week, and then the very first sandstorm of the year, and people who had already been there were saying, "Hey, you guys better get ready because when these sandstorms come in, they're brutal." And we literally watched it. I remember, coming out of the tent, and they said, "Here it comes," and literally you could see. And I've known this has happened in Phoenix a couple times where they get those walls of dust that come.
Big haboobs.
Yeah, whatever the term is.
Yeah.
And literally we watched it approach, and then it just comes through, and it's brutal. Yeah. And we had so we were a signal battalion, and we were responsible for all the camps. So we provided base camp to base camp communications. That was the type of unit we were.
Would the sandstorms interrupt the communications?
Yeah. All our microwave and satellite shots all suffered every time these sandstorms came through.
And how long would they last for? About
some hours, some would last a day.
Really, that long?
Yeah.
Wow.
It just depends. And so we had all the camps in northern Kuwait and all of the camps in southern Iraq up to Talil Air Base, which was up by Nasiriyah. So we had quite a few camps that we had to keep all of the communications between functioning the whole time we were there, and upgrading because the Army's constantly upgrading.
So where was your last duty station, and what was your rank then at that time?
So I did that deployment. I got back in 2005, and then I actually went on to I decided to make my Army career the same as my civilian career, so I applied to be a CID agent and got accepted.
Really?
Yeah.
How cool.
So in 2007, I went back on active duty to Missouri, where the MP school is, and I went to the CID special agent course and graduated. And I served with CID for about a year and a half, and then the Army Reserve was critically short in my signal warrant MOS, so I got pulled back to a signal battalion in my secondary MOS, and deployed again to the Middle East in 2012 with the same signal battalion out of Sacramento, and did another year mission all over the Middle East to Jordan.
Okay.
We had people in Afghanistan. And I was a CW3 at that point, and then I came back and in 2013, and I was able to go back to CID. And unfortunately, they started a big drawdown, and they didn't want senior. I was ready to promote to CW4. There was like 3 of us in the detachment, the CID detachment, and basically the Army was drawing down in 2015, and I was strongly encouraged to submit my retirement packet. So I did, and I was retired.
As a CW3?
As a CW3, yeah. And I'm still actually in the IRR because I chose to retire. There's a retired section of the inactive ready reserve.
Okay.
So technically I'm still in. I'm what's called a gray area retiree. So even though I retired...
I've heard that term.
Yes, I retired in 2015, but I still have an ID card. It's not a retired ID card fully, but it still allows me to use all the base facilities. Right. And in 2 years, I will start drawing my retirement checks because you have to be 60 or any combat deployment after 2009. You can, for however long you were deployed, you can draw your retirement early. So I can draw mine a year early at age 59.
Now, I think I heard you say Missouri, but I didn't hear where. So when Fort McClellan closed, because that used to be where the MP school was. When it closed, where did they move the schooling to?
It went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Fort Leonard Wood.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's
that way they could train them to watch the prisoner. Oh, that's Leavenworth. I always get Leonard Wood and Leavenworth mixed up.
They actually train the military corrections officers at Fort Leonard Wood.
They do.
But,
okay.
Yeah, for the correction facility at Leavenworth. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've had quite a storied career then in law enforcement, a pretty extensive background between civilian and military with CID and stuff. That's really interesting. I'm so glad that you shared that with us. Looking back on your service to our country, which I thank you for, by the way. Looking back on it, and I know you already answered meeting Evie, so you can't answer that with this one. What was your favorite duty station. And then in closing, I wanted to ask you, when you retired, how did you end up going from California to our neck of the woods here in Cochise County?
Sure. Yeah, out of my whole Army career, my most memorable time, or what I feel like I got the most satisfaction from, was when I was in E7 and I first went to Sacramento and I became a platoon sergeant, what I would say a real platoon sergeant. It's one thing to be a training NCO, and I was a drill sergeant and training NCO from E5 to E7, but I had missed when I was an E5 on active duty in Germany. I actually had a squad and I was in charge of them. But when I was an NCO as a trainer, you don't have soldiers anymore that you are responsible for. So that year and a half that I was a platoon sergeant for a communications platoon was probably the most rewarding. I felt the most satisfaction I could recall out of my whole career is just getting that, because I knew those young kids were going to go to Iraq, or Afghanistan, because I had just spent the last year and a half since 9/11 training other units to go, and I saw the look on all these young soldiers' faces, and here I'm in my, late 30s, and had enough time to digest what was going to happen. And I remember coming in my first day as a platoon sergeant, and I'll make it real brief. I had a brand new second lieutenant right out of Sacramento State College, and he's a great guy. He's a lieutenant colonel now on active duty. He commands a battalion in Japan, but he was a brand new second lieutenant, and he had a platoon sergeant before me that was already retired. What we call him road, retired on active duty. He was basically checked out and really didn't care about anything. And so I came in and I had this little speech prepared about, hey, it's not if we get deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, it's when we get deployed to Afghanistan. So you need to prepare. And I had this whole speech. And I remember that second lieutenant, after I dismissed the platoon at that very first formation where I introduced myself to him, he calls me into his office and he is seriously concerned about, I'm frightening the soldiers. I'm scaring the soldiers. And to this day, we still laugh and joke about that conversation he and I had for about an hour and a half. And after the end of that, he understood where I was coming from. But again, anybody who's been a platoon sergeant, you're responsible for these people. You're responsible for 30 lives. And I remember I took them through as a platoon sergeant all the way up to before we were going to deploy. And then, of course, I had that summer right before I went and became a warrant officer. So when I came back, I felt really bad because like 3 or 4 of them came, hey, we know you're a warrant officer now, sir, but can't you be our platoon sergeant for this deployment? And so yeah, that compliment. I missed that. And so it was hard for me to be deployed with them and not be their platoon sergeant. I had to watch, I'm watching them from my job at the battalion headquarters, but it was hard watching the platoon sergeant who replaced me take them through all that, through the deployment. But
Kathy said, way to keep it real. I'm sure the soldiers appreciated that.
Yeah, I miss that. That's if anybody in the Army, if you get the opportunity, you get up there and you get to be a platoon sergeant, and that's a great job. It really is. It's very rewarding. But to get here to Sierra Vista, so I had come to Fort Huachuca numerous times. I think the first time I came here was in like 1998, because Fort Huachuca used to have the 11th Signal Brigade here, and they had the 86th and the 40th Signal Battalions under them, and all of our reserve communications units worked very closely with them. And I came out here, I think, for the first time in 1998, and we did a training exercise with the 11th Signal Brigade with our reserve unit. And so I had been coming here, and I would always go back, and I'd tell my wife, I said, man, there's this place, Sierra Vista, Fort Huachuca. I absolutely love this area. I fell in love with it. I was like, any chance they needed somebody to come to Fort Huachuca, I was like, I'll go TDY here. And so over the years, I just kept coming back. And finally, I told my wife, when I was getting ready to retire from the Harpshill, I said, hey, let's take a trip down to Sierra Vista and let you look at it and get, no pressure, but
did you know anybody here at that time?
I had convinced my mom and her husband to move here. So they had lived in Tucson for many, many years. And then they went up to Michigan, where my mom's husband's from, and they bought a house and they didn't like the cold. They thought, at our age, we don't need the cold anymore. So they were going to come back to Arizona. And I told them, I said, go look at Sierra Vista. You guys lived in Tucson forever.
Right.
Check out Sierra Vista. So they did. And they ended up moving here, probably around 2010, 2011. So they were here. So we took a trip. We came down, stayed with them, looked around. Evie said, by the time the trip was over, she said, let's put our house up for sale and we'll move down here. So we did.
Wow, that's huge.
Sold our house in California. Couldn't wait to get out of there. I'm sorry. I had a great 30-year run there, but I couldn't stay another day. I couldn't. It's just changed way too much. And we still go back, obviously, and visit, but we've been here now since 2016, and I absolutely love it. We were renting for the first 4 years, and we bought a place, a couple acres out in Hereford. And
that's where I live, out in Hereford. I love it out there.
Yeah, we're very happy.
When I go to California, the price of gas.
Oh.
I mean, the rents that they're asking. I watch Judge Judy. I watch the People's Court, and there'll be cases where somebody will be suing the thing, and all they're doing is renting a bedroom. Bedroom for like $1,500 a month. That's more than my mortgage payment, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that. It's cost of living there is really high.
Yeah, it's different.
In closing, do you have any wise words of wisdom or any words of encouragement that you'd like to share with our audience?
What's funny is military and my higher patrol service were so similar. They go hand in hand, and those two career fields there's a lot of similarities involved. And so I would just offer this, and I try to say this to my nephew a lot because he's young, and I would counsel younger officers. So if you're a younger person in the military or a younger law enforcement officer or considering those careers, what you want to do is you never want to focus on short-term, what we call noise, okay, and all the distractions of what's happening in our country or in the world. What you want to do is if you believe in this work and this way of life, then you focus yourself on all those core principles and don't let all that noise interfere. Do the best job you can. Stay positive. Yep, stay positive. And always seek further self-development. Mm-hmm. Educate yourself. Read. Not enough young people read anymore. So read and become proficient in your career. Never stop learning during your career. And that will be the greatest thing to serve you throughout a career. Just keep learning. If you spend 30 years, I spent 30 years doing 2 jobs, and then when you retire, you can walk away peacefully, content, knowing that you did your part for your time in your service, and you can pass it to somebody else and just live a quiet, peaceful life after that. But that's what I would say. Stay the course.
I have. I would love to have you back on because this interview. And I say this with a lot of my guests, but I don't say it unless it's true. There's so many more questions I could ask of you. And I'd love to have you back sometime to follow up, and maybe you and Evie, maybe we could talk her into sitting down. Maybe she could hide back behind there. So I don't know, whatever she feels comfortable doing. But yeah, I would love to, because I feel that there's still so much more to share. I mean, we didn't get to touch on all your CID background and what it was like, being married and raising children. And I mean, that's what I'm saying. This interview, if I wanted to, could go on for another couple hours. So.
Well, yeah, it's always hard to take 30 years and condense it down.
Condense it down, yeah. Andy, thank you so much for sitting down again with us this morning.
My pleasure.
I have a few announcements here to read real quick, if you could bear with us, and then we'll wrap it up. So today, February 3rd, 2023, our events are 1,700 to 1,900 hours. We have the DAV Fry Chapter 14. It's the monthly chicken fried steak dinner. That'll be taking place over at the VFW Post 9972. So if you want a good meal, head on over there today and get yourself a good chicken fried steak. And you'll also be supporting the DAV, and I know that they would appreciate that. On Monday, February 6th, starting at 1830 and going to 2000, we have the Scottish American Military Society monthly meeting that will be taking place here at the Warrior Healing Center in the main conference room. today, I forgot to mention this. Today, we also have the Warrior Healing Center. It's the Fun Food Friday. The Cooks Club does a special meal that they bring in every first Friday of the month. That will be today from 11 to 1400 hours. So come on in and get yourself something to eat. Tuesday, February 7th, starting at 18:30, going to 19:30, we have the AMVETS Post 89 meeting, which will be taking place here at the Warrior Healing Center. And then on Wednesday, February 8th, starting at 1700 and going to 18:30, we have the Team RWB Wandering Wednesdays Perimeter Trail Miller/Hunter Canyon. Say that again. On East Miller Canyon Road. That was a lot. So if you're interested in doing that, that's Wednesday, February 8th at 1700, starting at East Miller Canyon Road. And on Thursday, starting at 1700, going to 2000, we have the Team RWB Thursday night social ride, and they will be meeting at Culver's. And we have the Saturday, February 11th, starting at 10 and going to 1100 is the WACVA-AWU San Pedro chapter meeting, and they meet at the Sierra Vista United Methodist Church. So that is all of the announcements that I have for today. Again, Andy, I can't thank you so much for joining us. Thank you
for having me.
very much. Thank you for your service, and hopefully we can get Evie in here to sit down and we can continue on with your interesting story, because I like I said, there's so much more I could ask, and it is hard to condense all of that down into an hour. So,
yeah, it's not often I sit down and talk about it, so it's
I'm privileged and honor. Thank you. All right, everybody, have a great day. We'll see you next Friday. My scheduled guest is supposed to be David Lookabaugh. David, if you're watching this or if you see this, I hope you get to feeling better, brother, and that you'll be able to make it next Friday. All right, everybody, have a great day. See you next Friday. Bye.